red button.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, so introduce yourself.
All right. I'm Shutong Wei. I'm a research assistant at DARE.
What's your background? Where'd you go to school? Undergrad? Grad?
Right. So I went to Beijing International Studies University from 2013 to 2017, and then I came here.
What'd you get your bachelor's in?
Economics and international trade, as they called it.
Uh-huh.
And then I came here, did my master's at BU in economics.
And what's your interests?
Behavioral economics, and among other things.
And what are we doing together?
We are researching on behavioral economics.
What exactly?
Well, right now we are doing the discounting research paper on how to use difference equations to present discounting in animals.
And people, it's the same
People
equations.
or animals?
Well, it's the same equations.
Yeah.
There's no evidence that people and we don't know about whether insects discount the same way, but by the time we get to pigeons and rats and mice, it's all the same.
All right.
The difference is K. We're much less sensitive to delay. Yeah, and we're not as risk averse.
Right.
Okay, now you ask me some questions.
Okay. What do you think this can be used on research of people?
Oh, well, I think that the problem in economics is that it's not behaviorally based, and even the behaviorally based economics does not make good enough measurements. It still aggregates a lot of data, and here we're using signal subject design, so we know what the variability is between each individual subject. And we had one subject that we knew freaked out when the delay was increased by doubling or tripling the delay. And we expect that there's a distribution in people like that. So some people can't tolerate the rate of reinforcement change. And on interest tests, they show up as being conventional. They want to work 9 to 5. They don't want any variability in their life. But they show more anxiety.
Why?
We don't know. But since they don't have behavioral measures of how people respond to doubling and tripling in delay, and we don't measure these things because they don't have the preparation. We don't know these things. You would have to study them in real time.
Yeah, but do you think economics is doing as a field, is doing a good job in measuring?
No, it's doing a terrible job. It don't, it's all, most of the money goes into macroeconomics.
Right.
And we have never been able to predict any recession. And there's very little agreement. I mean, we're full of myths. People still think that there are people who know how to invest in the stock market. And we know that no one does, because we know over a 30-year period, no one beats the ETFs, the indexes. Even Warren Buffett and people say, "Oh, he made all this money." Yes, but you know, he he bought things where the information wasn't widely appreciated.
Right.
Once it's appreciated, then the market takes it into consideration. And they don't understand that economics and evolution and voting
Right.
and all that stuff are all the same. And we don't, and they think that people have judgment they don't have.
Right.
So the review of papers has zero utility.
Yeah, but the thing is also, I think in economics, a lot of the times people think about the net, amount. Like you lose some amount this time, and then you gain some next time, and then you look at the net that you get from both times. But I think in real life, people don't
No, they don't do that.
count it that way. Yeah.
And I think that the estimate of expected value, only 20% of the people can do that.
Do what expected value?
Well, yes.
Yeah, but I think right now people look at expected utility more.
Or utility,
Then,
doesn't matter.
Okay.
The behavioral version is value, the economic name is utility.
Yeah, but
And they have no estimate of the social value.
yeah.
They have no way of measuring social value, and
Right.
and we know that in the marketplace, people want to be in exciting, well-run, respectful companies. Does that change all companies? No. Did it? Most companies have a 40-year lifespan, and they're trapped by behavioral momentum. Is behavioral momentum part of economics? No, it's just Tony Nevin and a couple of people, followers, understand that if you even pay people off a little bit, they'll continue doing what they're doing and not understand the risk of not changing. There's a new sort of rule, but you can't even buy an ETF for it, which is that if a company plows into its earnings, if it takes its earnings, spends 20% on R&D,
Right.
it makes twice the amount of money that companies that do 5%. Can't even buy an ETF. The market is not sensitive to reality in the short run. And in the long run, you have to use chaos theory to understand things. Is chaos theory part of economics? No.
I don't think chaos theory is a part of any social science so far.
It's part of evolutionary psychology. We know that you can't predict genetic change. You can't predict the effect of changes in environment on we don't know which animals and plants are going to go extinct, which ones are going to adapt. All we know is we think we have control over bacteria and viruses, but
Right.
that's obviously not true. There'll be a
Well, short term.
mutation. Yeah, short term. We know because of chaos theory there'll be some mutation that will kill
Yeah.
a huge number of people. And we see this in the plant world. There are funguses that attack all the bananas or whatever. And bees are disappearing and we don't understand why. So I would say in general economics as a model is based on rationality, and I think rationality is a religious belief.
Yeah.
And I think that behavioral economics isn't down to the level which you and I've been working, which is the micro level of looking at how each event
Yeah.
determines the perceived value. And if you start there and you build up, you can maybe figure out how to train people to behave more intelligently.
Well, I think one thing at least in game theory, is that it kind of prescribes what is supposed to happen, but it has nothing to say about if something goes wrong.
Well, I don't even think that's true. I mean, in game theory, people, in the classical case of where you're pitting cooperation versus competition, people will always wipe out the other person and take, a little bit.
Yeah.
But in fact, as Gerhard Minnemeyer showed, if you have joint enterprise, that's not true.
Yeah,
And
but that's a different assumption.
One different assumption. You have to use baseball, where everybody goes to bat, and so the outcome depends on everybody's contribution. Whereas in cooperation, a single.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, well, that's the
wrong
wrong
underlying
about
assumption.
Are wrong. Well, has this affected behavioral economics? Not at all. But these things in the end will, Minnemeyer's right. In fact, if you look at how Google works, how 23andMe works, you see that the really modern companies.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is really prescriptive. You are saying people should act like that, which
No, not should. They do. When they're successful, they do.
Well, yeah, when they're successful.
Yeah, I mean,
if everyone's successful, then
yeah,
you wouldn't.
well, but the society as a whole is more of a joint enterprise. That's why there are 5 stakeholders, not 2. Marx and Engels were totally wrong. It's not the owners and the workers.
Right.
There's also the government. There are also the buyers.
Yeah, of course.
All right.
Yeah, I agree.
And the managers. And the managers and the owners are often separate.
Right.
And have separate interests. And people say, well, isn't it good to give these managers all this money? And I would say no.
Why?
Because it insulates them for the long-term success of their companies.
Okay, so where should the money go?
It should be distributed more evenly, not as evenly as it was in Sweden during the socialist period, but you want it to be like baseball. Who gets paid the most in baseball? You don't know, because you don't know. Well, in American baseball, the pitcher gets the most money. Who is the person who has the most brains? The catcher, because the catcher calls what pitch to throw. And then the next highest paid person are the good hitters, like the shortstop and the left fielder.
Right.
The first baseman. But everybody gets paid roughly, there's not more than a 2 or 3 to 1 ratio between the players.
Right.
And that's how you want it. You want it so there's an incentive to be the best player, but you want the incentive heavily to be the best team. And you have a marketplace for players, so they get traded.
Yeah.
And they have tryouts. So you work for a minor league team and then you move into the majors. Now you would think that baseball, because there's the rate of injury is not like football, that they would live long. They don't. We don't know why. But probably...
But why do they die?
We don't know, but it could be tobacco related. And
That's
left-handers
another case.
don't live as long as right-handers. We don't know why. But I think that the idea of rationality and free will are so destructive in economics, that behavioral economics, where we actually study what goes on in individuals
Right.
and instant to instant, and how we can arrange the contingencies, which is the part that originally attracted me to behavior analysis. The way in which people get paid off really matters. So the rules of baseball. Baseball is an extremely complicated game, and it appears slow, but it is not, because it's so complicated. And what everybody used to say is how the jocks were so stupid. It turns out that if you look at basketball, most sports now takes a tremendous amount of smarts, because you're always having to outwit the other side. And in baseball, if you're a baseman, you have to stop people from stealing bases. And Jackie Robinson was introduced stealing bases to the major leagues. He was black. He was the first major black player. Changed the game. So the pitcher would have to look over their shoulder. But I think what we have learned, the positive part of economics, is that we now know that marketplaces do better than planning. And planning seems more rational, but marketplaces don't seem rational at all. Right?
No.
But they're exactly the way behavioral economics would say they should be.
I would say they're more efficient, but sometimes some particular individuals or fields would suffer from that.
Of course they suffer. But part of evolution is always that
Yeah, I
there's
know.
successes and failures. And I
Yeah.
think
I
that
just don't like that notion.
the cross paradigmatic view is politics, evolution, society, genetics. They're all part of one thing. They're not really separate. And the only thing that we know for sure is the universe will expand and go cold.
Yeah.
there is nothing certain about anything. I yesterday we were talking about, well, at the end, what are the uncertain things? Well, we don't know if protons are going to decay and fall apart.
Yeah.
We don't know whether the light will shift so red it becomes like radio signals, because everything is moving apart, or is it going to get bluer? Is that as you lose energy, it gets redder. You know that. That's it's.
Yeah.
The energy is shorter wavelengths carry more energy. So is it going to get redder, or is it because of the expansion and the increased speed of expansion it's going to get bluer? Those are the kinds of, that's probably answerable. But we don't know about the protons, whether they're going to decay. We're only beginning to understand where the proton mass comes from. And so there's a lot to learn, but we do know that this idea that we can figure out markets and that we should pay people a lot of money for making these guesses. I'll make a prediction that most IPOs will be handled online, and they'll be more gradual. People will raise money and it will just become like buying a phone.
I think business is sometimes becoming more local, like
Right.
different. Maybe in different domains, it's going into different directions.
Well,
I think-
we know, for instance, in politics, that
Well, at
the
least-
idea that you can do mass politics
Mhm,
and just do TV,
mhm,
it works every once in a while, but we do
Right now.
know, huh?
like now.
No, Trump is only
Well, okay,
has
2
a
years
third
ago,
of,
let's say.
yeah, right, but he ran against a very wooden candidate.
Yeah, of course.
We know what people want
Mhm,
socially. We want people who look like peace leaders,
mhm,
who are personable and seem to care.
mhm.
Okay, and
Yeah.
how to talk as if they're talking with the person, not at them, and not talk over their heads. And is that part of political science? No, it is not.
Yeah.
Does
Political
Hollywood
science
now?
is more like after you come into power, what should you do,
Right,
instead
yeah.
of how.
And it's about polls. And polls, why do polls go wrong? Well, because they don't measure the right things. Because it was like with smarts. Smarts was measured by IQ, and it turns out that has like 10 factors. And when we replace it by stage, stage is one factor with loadings of over 0.91. So getting the right variables is one of what you and I are going to spend the next year figuring out, or what are the right variables to represent social value to individuals. We don't care about the groups. The groups will take care of themselves when you take care of the individuals. And we already have there's already a tremendous amount of work on altruism, but we don't, all these things have to be connected. Chimps have a much higher rate of murder and punishment than humans do, but humans still believe in punishment. And the question is, other than if you use baseball as a model, if you have make a lot of errors in baseball, they take you off the team.
Yeah.
And but if you're stealing bases, we don't know how many bases you're supposed to attempt to steal. Okay?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of, even in baseball, and baseball is the most statistically analyzed sport there is. We still don't know who's going to win.
Oh, there are too many variables contributing to
No,
that.
there aren't. We
No,
know
in
that.
the game.
Well, but we do know that the teams with the most money do better.
Well, yeah. That's
Okay, even but in football, where they have draft picks, and if you're low in the standings, you get higher picks.
Yeah.
You would think it would compensate. It helps, but even the football teams, the Patriots do too well. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And the Chargers did too well, and the Rams do too well. These are big markets,
Right.
big teams. But why does Chicago do so terrible in baseball? It's a big city. Why haven't the White Sox done great?
I don't know.
See, these
I
are
don't know
the kinds of things where even so, the question we asked in discounting was how we aggregate the individual instances. And we found that they simply added after discounting. But I don't think the world is that simple.
No.
And so when we scale things up, we have to find out what the relationship between the various levels are. And that's just not done in economics. So game theory is a rational model, but it has very little to do in predicting, in fact, how people behave. I mean, yes, you can run the experiment, but that's not the way, in fact, people actually behave in the real world.
Right.
They don't steal from each other. The rate of theft is very low. So big behavioral economic problems is what causes the transition between where you have corruption, which is the traditional game theoretical view, where you get as much as you can instantly, no matter what the harm is to others, towards, in fact, that we're very pro-social and we mostly don't steal. So we have to solve those problems. Those are the big problems. And having come from China, you know that just having the slogan, "We're for the social good," doesn't make it true. We have to find out empirically.
Yeah, well, you have to convince people somehow that they won't start a revolution against that. That's why you have the slogan.
I know, but I'm
and
just...
people can convince themselves.
Why is it that Brexit occurred when, in fact, what we know is markets get bigger? And why are startups defeat big old line companies? Why is Tesla doing better than Fiat Chrysler? So we know a couple of things from chaos theory. We know we need quite a bit of variability, and we know we need to use operant conditioning, as Google showed.
Yeah.
The best way to organize which thing pops up first in Google is to see how often it's chosen, which is what operant conditioning would say. But we also know that that rule, because of game theory, is not always the best rule. So we have to figure out how you get joint enterprise. What makes people go for joint enterprise?
Yeah.
Yeah, but why? I mean, it's not short term, it's long term. How do we get people to think more about the long term? Why are there so many people who don't understand global warming? Why do the environmentalists don't understand that electricity prices are going down, not up? And that we don't have to worry about fresh water because we're going to be able to desalinate. So when you don't understand the long term and you don't understand the substitutability, which is a good part of economics, that people are worried about plastic. Well, we were having a discussion yesterday. The problem isn't plastic. We know how to recycle all of plastic. Wrappers, straws. It's just a matter of the cost. And will the cost of recycling go down? Of course it will. Because it takes energy to do it.
Yeah.
And smarts to identify what the thing is you want to recycle. And information is going way down in price, and so is energy.
Well, the thing is, like, you have to do something on your way
Yeah, but you don't.
to the decreasing cost. Otherwise, it would be too late.
Yeah, but
Before
I believe me,
you
we're
reach
not.
that point.
Believe me, losing some turtles over straws and some fish is not going to do human beings in. But we do know what the problem is. Identifying the problem is much more important than coming up with an interim
Well,
solution.
that's because you're putting humans before turtles and fish.
Oh no. Even if you want to maintain the diversity, which you do, because you never know what you're going to need. One of the things that, about chaos theory is you never know what you're going to need. So you want to maximize diversity.
Yeah.
And that's why capitalism works better than socialism. If you have big state-run enterprises, there's no diversity in effort. And that's why having nonprofit universities does better than profit universities. Because the incentive of profit-making universities is not long-term innovation. Right?
Yeah.
It's money. And there's no percentage to be made in long-term science, in long-term art. But we're going to have androids, and they're going to do most of the work, and people are going to be paid for doing what they like being done. We don't even know how to do that. But we're thinking so old-fashioned is the big problem. We just don't really see what the world's going to look like.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't think it's that hard to think of, because there's certain trends. For instance, is there more freedom now than there was 10,000 years ago?
Where?
Anywhere. For people.
Yeah.
Of course. We used to kill all the men when there were wars. Right? There was no point to keeping your captor men. She kept the women and some of the children. And you may, but with the invention of agriculture, we started saving the men. And I tell people this, and they say, "Oh, but slavery's so terrible." I said, "Being killed is worse." And
not necessarily.
And having slave wages during the industrial era, did people live longer in the industrial era than in the agricultural era? Of course they did. So everything is measurement is the heart. Measurement and asking the right questions, which measurement's about. Measurement's always about figuring out what the real variables are, and how to get at them. And that's what behavioral economics should be about.
Yeah.
Next question. I answered your question, didn't I?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. What do you think about jealousy in humans?
Oh, I think jealousy in humans, I think it's part of evolution.
Okay.
And I think mate selection, there are animals in which the females have control. Hyenas, they have control.
Right.
And there are insects. Clearly, there are insects that the females have all the power. But in general, it's the males that compete for the right to reproduce. And I've always had a very simplistic notion that mates and territory are sort of the same thing.
Right.
They're exploitable. And jealousy is just the guarding of mates.
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily in romance. It can be in other things.
Well, I mean, listen, are people jealous of movie stars? Of course they are. But do movie stars generally have good lives? No.
Well, I mean, that's not what they think.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But even Jeff Bezos, is getting divorced.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah. Well, she wasn't they weren't able to handle the relational issues. And I would say that you hit probably on the most important social variable, attachment.
Right.
And failures of attachment are the most punishing.
On
People, they will.
No. I mean, on someone being attached or someone attaching to some
People,
another people.
because people have such poor perspective taking of others and of themselves. They make terrible choices.
Right.
And they're not able to estimate. They are not good at assessing risk, and they don't. If you're going to fool around, you should have a discussion about it, not just do it and try to hide it.
Well, I mean, you should have a discussion about everything, not just about that.
Right. So, but I mean, jealousy. I mean, it doesn't. The fact is, we're very interdependent on each other. And so we're never going to overcome jealousy. And
I
there's,
agree.
and so we have to learn how to deal with it. And we have, imprisoning people, making women slaves of men to get rid of men's worries about women fooling around. It's crazy. I mean, so the solution in many traditional cultures, which is to make women property of men, is really horrible.
Yeah.
So it's not really a solution.
Of course.
But it's there for jealousy.
Yeah.
It's a use of power to eliminate jealousy. Genital mutilation is another example of that.
The what?
Genital mutilation, where they take the clitoris out of the woman.
Yeah.
I mean, they're horrendous.
What do you think is the relationship between jealousy or intensity of the jealousy and ego? I mean,
I don't know what ego is.
Okay.
It's a metaphor.
Yeah,
I
Not the actual
think
ego.
we can measure attachment, and we've done a number of studies on attachment.
Yeah.
And I think that probably a behavioral measure of the cost of broken attachment is to look at depression and how long it lasts.
What about anger?
Anger is short. People do become angry their whole lives, but those are generally people who've been abused. And the reason we're working so much on personality disorders is we're trying to find out a dependent measure. All the symptoms associated with personality disorder are dependent measures. Then we can start to figure out what causes them. And when you get a scale dependent measure, guess what? You have behavioral social economics. Right?
Yeah.
So
that's on a lot of objects.
Huh?
That's on a lot of subjects.
Right.
Yeah.
So it all comes back to getting the right variables. And which is the variable you have to discover first? The independent or the dependent variable?
The what?
The independent or the dependent variable? Dependent. And people don't understand that. And they don't understand they need clean dependent variables.
They need what?
Clean.
Oh,
That
wait,
means
I heard
when
wait.
you do factor analysis, you don't get 10 things for smarts. And for
Not
personality disorders, you don't get, in one test, 10 variables.
Yeah.
One test should give you one variable.
Mm-hmm.
So they just don't know what the strategies are. And I think there are two things that compete. It was a huge evolutionary breakthrough to tell stories. And we do know that imitation exists in animals and there is culture. But there isn't anything like storytelling.
Right.
And so storytelling, the problem with storytelling is it makes sense when you are the subject and you're trying to predict how you're trying to understand your own experience.
Right.
So cause and effect, I do this and this is how it turns out, makes great sense.
Right.
But then if you use it projectively, if this person does this, this is what should happen to them, doesn't work.
Right.
And we have to figure out how to have stories that are not based on the illusion of free will and free choice.
Right.
And that's what we do here. That's what Dare does. We get rid of the metaphorical writing and we try to write as behaviorally as we can so that the stories we tell can be tested. Anyway, did I answer that about jealousy?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on.
Yeah. Why do you think humans are overly obsessed with similarity in a group? Not in a group, but
Everywhere. Everywhere.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to evolution.
Yeah, I know.
I
Why?
think that there are two things that the two big
And
forces.
why can't people
I'm going
grow
to tell
out of
you.
that? Okay.
They're two things. They're two big outcomes. And I think Darwin. I think Malthus understood it. Adam Smith understood it. Mill understood it. But I think it really only became clear with Darwin
What became clear?
that survival of the fittest, passing, and when Mendel showed out that it was genetically based, and Dawkins showed that there was the cultural equivalent of memes, not just genes, we all of a sudden had a basis. Dawkins never got a Nobel Prize.
Yeah, but if
if
you're fitting something, you have to have a mold or a model there that you're fitting into.
And you're not fitting into. These are the product of chaos theory. Survival of the fittest, the marketplace, all of these things are just descriptive. They're not proscriptive. So it's not whether should people be similar. It's
No,
that
I'm not saying they should be.
If they are similar, the chances of passing those memes on and genes are greater.
Yeah,
so
but
you
the
and
thing
I
is
share
whether,
a lot of memes. Although we're humans, we other than our being very smart, we don't share a lot of genes.
No,
you and I don't look alike.
My point is whether sharing memes makes people similar or the other way around.
I think
when they want to become similar.
I don't think they want to become similar. I think the ones that are similar have a higher chance of passing their genes and memes on.
No, they want to be similar.
No,
That's
that
why peer
they,
pressure exists.
no, peer pressure exists because group survival depends on it, and groups carry memes and genes. They carry both. And so if I look at the intermarriage rate in DARE employees, the number of people who marry somebody outside of their ethnic group is really low. It's really amazing.
Why? No, you're saying you expect a higher rate, or
Well, if I thought that they had a choice, Mancy wouldn't be marrying a guy who is basically, 2 cities away from her. Okay?
right.
And Bob Miller married an American Japanese woman. His son married a Afro-American. That's unusual.
In where?
Anywhere, in any culture.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm saying the forces, the conformity forces, just serve the purpose. I think they serve less of a purpose now because those aren't the right variables for survival. But I mean, no. I mean, how smart your mate is and how motivated they are in the sense of interest, those are much more important. And you know why pro-social is so important. If you look at the scientists, are there very many evil sciences? How many evil scientists do you read about in history?
Right.
None. None. It's really interesting. There are no monster scientists.
Well, I mean, Nazi did work on nukes.
Yeah, but they didn't. They were engineers, not scientists.
Well.
Okay, I mean the only one that was ever questionable was the German guy who stopped Hitler from pursuing the atom bomb, or that's what he says. I forget his name. It'll come to me. But anyway, for most part, scientists are very pro-social. We have no idea why. But that's the kind of things that social behavioral economics should solve. Why is it that science, being interested in truth, is so pro-social? Why is truth such a big interest of people? Why are monkeys will work all day to find out things? It's a very big reinforcer for monkeys.
Well, I mean, truth is good for survival, though.
Yeah, but why should you? But it's not for that particular problem.
What particular problem?
Well, they're not trying to survive, the monkeys. It's the general interest in truth. It's a very general interest.
Yeah, but still, it's
that'll increase. That's the difference between rats and mice.
No, I mean, it's good for survival in that you might need it sometime, anytime.
Well, we
I'm
agree.
not saying you have to have it.
Right. Well, we're agreeing, but that's why I'm an evolutionary behavioral scientist, because we agree. But I think that we don't understand how rough the world of memes is. And I think that there's a way under emphasis on memes. But I grew up in Hollywood. And I always thought that everybody in Hollywood were acculturated to Hollywood. And then I realized that, in fact, people who went to Hollywood and were successful had the right genes. They not had only the right interest, but they had the right genes. And I realized that, in fact, interests were half genetic. So the fact that Hollywood is so influential is not cultural. It has a very large evolutionary aspect to it. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
And when cultures are overemphasizing cooperation and compliance, they can't make movies.
Yeah.
And if you can't, and so art and science are allied.
I mean, art is mostly chaos.
No, it's not. It's always, the artist is always selecting. Art is not just producing, it's selecting. Artists, paint over what they paint. They cut
That's
more
not
on the
what I mean.
sculpture. They edit their films. They edit the scripts. They constantly reshoot scenes.
I'm not saying art is chaos.
No,
Where it comes from.
But you have to have a lot of variability.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. Well, variability is very important. But I think that the study of memes and why I think the memes gene interaction is known but not studied.
Right.
But I think it's everything.
I think more people need to read Selfish Genes.
Yeah, of course. But I think it's everything.
What's everything?
I think that the interaction between
Right.
genes and memes is the whole ball, at least for animals
Right.
and plants. And what interests me is how plants learn genetically. They don't learn behaviorally, but they develop tropisms. They have tropistic like behavior and even reflexive behavior, but they never learn in the sense that even the invertebrates that classically conditioned learn. You can't train a plant or condition them.
Yeah.
But they do adapt and they do behave. So, what other questions?
No, I think
You're
got
done.
3
You
already.
did great.
All right. Thank you.
Turn off the camera, please. You're up.